how, in your experience, is individual ancestral healing work related to, the overall big picture cultural healing, or is it even related?
Yes, good question. And actually, that's a question that I had when I came to the work. I said, well, my whole life has been about cultural healing. My whole life has been about justice work and social change work. So how is this going to help me do that? And I remember asking Daniel for that question, and I kept struggling with the question. And he said, we are working on it, And I said, so is it just that you just get a whole lot of people doing this individual work, and then ultimately something happens? And he would say yes and no. It's more than so. Over the course of doing the work, this is when I sort of put the framework together in my own mind about myth making, so cultural myth making. So as we individually do the work, we are sort of shape shifting our personal mythologies that we operate from. But at the same time, we are impacting cultural mythologies. So for an example, I like to use the sort of mythic pattern, sort of departure and separation, descent and return. So if I apply that to the African Americans, I say the separation came when the Africans were captured or traded. So that was a separation from the homeland. The descent was the long, dark night of the soul, the liminality of the sea. All these Black bodies in the boat, and in my with my colleagues and I who do this work, talk about what we learned from the bottom of the boat. So what we learned from the bottom of the boat, all we had would have been our bodies and whatever was inside our spirit and our minds. So there's a story that's in the that I've heard a couple of times about Eshu, who is the Yoruba god of the crosswords, the divine messenger. The divine messenger. And Bayo Komolafe, psychologist, Nigerian psychologist, tells this story about sitting with some colleagues who were saying, well, if the African gods were so great and the ancestors, the Egun that you talk about, were so powerful, how did they allow enslavement to happen? And he says, well, let's look at it like this. Let's say Eshu, who is the god of communications, who is the divine messenger, decided that this was an opportunity for him to spread Black bodies across the earth and change the face of humanity. And imagine that the other gods in Orisha were saying, but at a great cost, there will be pain, there will be death, there will be suffering, there will be all kinds of degradation. And Eshu said, well, I know that. That is the sacrifice. That is the sacrifice I'm willing to make. But if we inscript ourselves in the minds and hearts of the people, we can change humanity. And so the gods then allowed enslavement to happen. Now, that's one way of telling the story. So if you tell the story that way, that's a cultural myth. That's cultural myth making in a way that can positively impact the psychology of people, so that the focus is no longer on the pain and the suffering and the loss and the disconnect, but the focus then becomes on the genius. So then the other part of the story is that, okay, so they traveled and arrived in the so-called new lands. And when they arrived, they began to unpack themselves. And when they unpacked themselves, they discovered the African spirituality and the gods and the powers that they carried within. So the other part of that story is that, so as time went on, Eshu realized, whoa, maybe I made a wrong decision here. These people are having a really, really hard time. So, but then Eshu said, no, they need a new story. Let me remind them of who they are. And so Eshu then inspired the storytellers among the people to tell this story And this story that I'm going to tell is from the sacred scriptures, the Holy Odu, and it's about it's from Eji Ogbe. Ogbe is the name of the divinity. So the story is this: when Ogbe was coming from heaven to earth, he went for divination. The diviner told him, in order for your mission to be successful, you will need 3 companions. You will need a bush rat to cut through the bush. You will need a fish to move through the waters. You will need a rooster to scratch a path on dry ground. So Ogbe stops by the farm, picks up the 3 companions, makes his journey from heaven to earth, arrives. Then he's faced with a thick bush. He doesn't know what to do. Ogbe is perplexed. As Shu whispers, remember, you've got a bush rat to cut a path through the bush. So Ogbe puts down the bush rat cuts the path through the bush, and Eshu says, follow the rat. Ogbe does, ends up on the other side of the bush. Then Ogbe is faced with the vast body of waters. He is perplexed. He doesn't know what to do. Eshu whispers, remember, you have a fish to chart a path through the waters. Ogbe drops the fish into the waters. The waters part. Ogbe walks through the waters, ends up on the other side of the water. Now looking at, oh, there's a town. I don't know which way to go. Ogbe is perplexed. As she whispers again, remember, you have a rooster to scratch the path on dry ground. Ogbe puts the rooster down on the ground. The rooster scratches the path on the dry ground. And then as she says, follow the rooster. All right, Ogbe follows the rooster, ends up in the center of the town. He is so happy. He's dancing and shouting and singing because he's found his way. And Eshu said, well, wait a minute. Let me remind you of something. He says, remember the bush rat that cut the path through the bush? That was because the bush rat used his Ori, his divine consciousness. Remember the fish that charted a path through the waters? That was because the fish used her Ori to part the waters. Remember the rooster who scratched a path on dry ground and you ended up in the heart of the city? That was because the rooster used the wisdom of the Ori. So Ogbe, you need to remember, if you use the wisdom of your Ori, of your divine consciousness, you have everything that you need. Your consciousness will light the path for you to solve every difficulty that you face in life. So when that story is told, that myth is told, it is emphasizing then that for people who are struggling, if they remember the power of their divine consciousness, they can move through difficulties in life. So it takes the emphasis off the pain and sorrow. It places the emphasis on the genius within. And so with the ancestral lineage healing work, this is what we're trying to get at. We're trying to help people then to discover the genius that they carry from their ancestors. So in the meditation work, we ask, what are 3 blessings that you carry from this line? We say, what are 3 burdens that are carried from this line? And then we establish a healing prayer container, and we ask that positive energies infuse these ancestral energies so that the alchemy can take place, the transformation can take place, the rescripting of the narrative can be born, and then the person is able to, again, benefit from the sort of positive psychology of embracing the genius within, which expands the scope, the thought, action, behavior scope, and allows the person to move forward with a greater sense of possibility. So that's kind of a long sort of storied explanation of how I see it, personal and culturally in the context of myth making.
That was such a powerful pair of stories. I've never heard them before. Really so very moving. And I can see how people who are doing this work can be so greatly helped instead of being, the sort of the wounded healer, connecting with the first story where, you've got this massive, horrendous wound that needs to be healed. Instead, you've got these gifts and these abilities that you can use to, sort of, I guess maybe superimpose, maybe is
Yeah,
that the right word?
create,
Right.
reinvent the self. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. It's such beautiful storytelling. Thank you.